The rain had the nerve to be beautiful that morning. It came down in silver curtains across the city skyline, soft and indifferent, the kind of rain that made everything outside the window look like a watercolor painting and made everything inside feel 10 degrees too warm. I stood at the coffee machine in the break room of Harlow and Voss Publishing, watching the drops race each other down the glass, and I thought about nothing. Absolutely nothing. I was getting very good at that. My name is Jay Daly. I'm 24 years old, I'm an Omega, and I have a very particular talent for pretending that things don't bother me when they bother me enormously. My therapist calls it avoidance. I call it survival. Either way, it's gotten me this far. The coffee machine gurgled and hissed and delivered something that looked like coffee and smelled like regret, and I wrapped both hands around the mug and let the warmth seep into my palms. The break room was empty this early, 7:45 in the morning, 45 minutes before anyone else on the editorial floor arrived, and that was exactly how I liked it. Quiet, ordered, predictable. What happened next was none of those things. The door swung open behind me with enough force to disturb the stack of napkins on the counter, and a scent hit me before a word was spoken, before I even turned around. It was cedar and winter air and something darker underneath, something that had no proper name but that my biology recognized with an embarrassing, traitorous immediacy. Alpha. New alpha. Unknown. I turned around slowly, because I was not the kind of person who spun around dramatically, and found myself looking at the most inconveniently attractive man I had ever seen in my professional life. He was tall. That was the first thing. Not just tall in the way that most alphas carry height like a badge, but tall in a way that made the break room feel smaller without him doing anything except standing in it. His hair was dark and slightly damp from the rain, curling at the ends in a way that was probably accidental and definitely unfair. His jaw was the kind of jaw that sculptors would study. His eyes, when they found mine across the small room, were a shade of gray that I could only describe as the color of the rain outside, and they were looking at me with an expression I couldn't immediately categorize. Not surprise, not aggression, something more careful than either of those. "You're here early," he said. His voice was low, unhurried, the kind of voice that didn't need to be loud to fill a room. "I work here," I said, which was not the most brilliant response I had ever produced, but in my defense, my nervous system was currently staging a small internal revolt. The corner of his mouth moved, not quite a smile. An acknowledgement. "Jose Knight," he said, and held out his hand across the counter. I looked at the hand. Large, steady, no ring. I took it because what else does one do, and shook it once. Jay Daly. His grip was firm but not demonstrative, the kind of handshake that didn't need to prove anything. His scent was stronger up close, and I released his hand perhaps slightly faster than was entirely polite and turned back to my coffee. "Are you the new acquisitions editor?" I asked the window. "Senior editor," he said, moving past me to the coffee machine with the easy, unhurried gait of someone who owned every room he walked into without having to announce it. "I start officially today. I was told to find the break room, and then find someone named Daly who would tell me where everything was." I stared at my reflection in the rain-dark glass. Of course that was happening. "That's me," I said. "I'll show you around." I didn't turn back around until I heard the coffee machine accept him without complaint, which seemed deeply unfair. I had been at Harlow and Voss for 2 years. I'd come in as a junior editorial assistant, survived 2 departmental restructurings, 1 particularly brutal manuscript season, and the general daily experience of being an Omega in an industry that had historically treated Omegas as either decorative or disposable. I had clawed my way to associate editor through nothing but work, the kind of grinding early morning, late night work that left fingerprints on everything I touched, and I was proud of that in the quiet, private way that I was proud of most things. I had 3 colleagues I genuinely liked. Priya, who ran production and brought her leftover baking to the office every Monday. Marcus, who was in rights and had the best black coffee in the building because he owned his own French press and guarded it like treasure, and Donna, the managing editor, who was 61 and had seen everything and was afraid of nothing, and who had once told me in a moment of rare warmth that I had better instincts than half the senior staff, and I should stop apologizing for them. I had precisely zero interest in office drama, workplace entanglements, or anything that would complicate the carefully structured professional life I had built for myself. Jose Knight was a complication I had not scheduled. I showed him the floor plan. The editorial desks arranged in their open-plan rows, the glass-walled offices along the east wall, where the senior staff sat, the archive room that smelled pleasantly of old paper, the supply closet with its eccentric system of labeling that Priya had installed and that everyone else had eventually surrendered to. He followed at my shoulder, asked precise questions, remembered the answers. He was professional, measured. He did not attempt anything inappropriate or uncomfortable. He was, by every observable metric, perfectly fine. His scent kept doing something to the back of my throat. By the time Donna arrived at 8:30 and introduced Jose formally to the rest of the team, I had arranged my face into its most neutral expression and decided that this was simply a situation I would manage. I was very good at managing situations. I went to my desk, opened my manuscript queue, and got to work. The first week passed without incident. If you defined incident narrowly and didn't count the 6 separate occasions on which Jose Knight appeared in my peripheral vision in a way that my body noticed before my brain did, he was good at his job. That was immediately clear. His editorial notes were sharp and precise. He had strong relationships with agents from his previous house, and he had the kind of quiet authority that didn't need volume to enforce itself. The senior staff respected him. The junior staff were slightly in awe of him. I remained professionally neutral. This was working perfectly well until the Thursday of the second week, when I was in the archive room pulling the backlist file for an author we were hoping to re-sign. And Jose came in to find something in the older acquisition records, and the two of us were suddenly alone in a room that smelled almost entirely of each other. And absolutely nothing happened except that it was incredibly difficult to concentrate on backlist sales numbers. "You've been avoiding me," he said, not looking up from the filing drawer. "I don't know what you mean," I said, looking at my spreadsheet. "We work together. I see you every day. You see me. You've been very careful about how much you interact with me." I looked up then, because the observation was too precise to respond to without looking at him. He was watching me now, standing with a folder in one hand, his expression measured and not at all triumphant about having said it. "I'm not avoiding you," I said. "I'm maintaining professional boundaries." Something shifted in his gray eyes. "I haven't done anything to require that." "No," I agreed, "you haven't, and I'd like to keep it that way." He looked at me for a long moment. Then he nodded, once, turned back to the filing cabinet and said, "Fair enough," in a tone that meant he had heard me and that he disagreed with my assessment but was going to respect it anyway. It was the most unnerving response he could have given me. An alpha who heard a boundary and simply acknowledged it, without argument or wounded ego, without trying to negotiate or explain why the boundary was unnecessary. That was genuinely disorienting. I was used to working around pushback. I had no particular strategy for simple, quiet respect. I took my backlist file and returned to my desk and did not think about it for the rest of the day. I only partially succeeded at this. My rules were simple, and I had made them for good reason. Rule 1, no workplace relationships. This one was self-explanatory, and had been self-explanatory since the incident in my first year at my previous company, where an alpha colleague had interpreted my friendly professionalism as romantic interest and had made the following 4 months genuinely miserable when I clarified otherwise. I had left that job. I had not made that mistake again. Rule 2. No alphas who led with their designation first. There was a particular type, not all alphas, not even most, but a particular type, who treated omega status as a category rather than a person. I had excellent instincts for them at this point. Rule 3. No one whose respect I wasn't certain of. This one was more recent, more personal, and I kept it closer to the chest than the other two. Jose Knight, for the record, was not violating any of my rules. He was not pursuing me. He was not treating my omega status as a defining characteristic. He was, by every available measure, respectful in a way that asked nothing in return. This was, somehow, worse. Because the problem with Jose Knight wasn't anything he was doing. The problem was what he wasn't doing, and the way that absence somehow made the air between us more charged rather than less. The ways that in the third week, when we ended up on the same manuscript project, a debut novel that had come in through his connections and been passed to my desk for developmental notes, he read my feedback with complete attention and then said, "This is exactly right. How did you catch that structural issue in chapter 12? Most readers miss it until the third act." The problem was the way he listened, not performatively, not with the slightly too focused attention of someone trying to impress. Just genuinely, the way a person listens when they think what you're saying matters. "Experience," I told him, about chapter 12. "Tell me more about your process," he said. Nobody had asked me that in approximately 2 years, and I found myself talking about it for 20 minutes in a conference room while the rain resumed outside and the city went gray and soft beyond the windows, about the way I read manuscripts first for instinct and then again for structure, about the way characters sometimes announce themselves in the margins before they fully arrive in the text, about the particular loneliness of being in the middle of a book you haven't decided about yet. He asked follow-up questions. Good ones. He pushed back on 2 things I said politely and with specific reasoning and was right about one of them and wrong about the other. And when I told him he was wrong about the other, he considered it and then said, "No, I think you're right. I was reading that scene with the wrong assumption. Not, I see your point. Not a graceful retreat. An actual adjustment." I gathered my notes at the end of the meeting and walked back to my desk and sat down and looked at my screen for 5 minutes without reading anything on it. This was a problem. The social event was Priya's idea, because most good and terrible ideas at Harlow and Voss were Priya's ideas. She organized a team drinks evening at a bar, 2 blocks from the office on a Friday in the 4th week, and she did it in that cheerful, orchestrating way that made it feel like a normal, nice thing instead of a social obligation, and by the end of Thursday, everyone had confirmed attendance, including, apparently, Jose. I almost didn't go. I ran several reasonable-sounding reasons through my head. Manuscript deadline early morning, the general merits of a quiet Friday at home, and then I went anyway because not going felt more significant than going, and I didn't want to give any of this more significance than it deserved. The bar was warm and low-lit, and had the comfortable noise level of a place that wasn't trying too hard. Our group took up 2 pushed-together tables near the back, and I ended up between Marcus and Donna, which was a configuration I was genuinely happy with. I drank a beer slowly and let the conversation wash around me, and was doing very well until approximately an hour in when the seating shuffled the way seating does at these things. And I looked up and found Jose sitting 2 chairs to my left, talking to one of the junior editors. He caught my eye across the conversation and said nothing, just nodded once with a slight upward tilt at the corner of his mouth, which was the Jose Knight equivalent of a greeting, and went back to talking to the junior editor. I went back to talking to Marcus. Everything was fine. Everything was fine right up until the point when I went to get a second drink and a man at the bar, not from our office, said something to me while I was waiting that was just precisely calibrated to be not quite offensive enough to call out directly, but absolutely offensive enough to land like a small cold stone in my chest. He had clocked my designation somehow, the way some people did in spaces, and the thing he said had that particular quality of treating my biology as an invitation. I smiled in the way I had learned to smile, the smile that was a door shutting, and turned away from him and found Jose standing close enough that he had clearly heard. His face was doing something that wasn't quite an expression, something held very still. "Are you all right?" he asked quietly under the bar noise. "Perfectly fine," I said, which was my default response to this category of situation and meant nothing at all. He looked at me, then at the man at the bar who had moved on, already talking to someone else, the incident already forgotten on his end because it always was on their end. J. Just my name. The way he said it was different from the way he said most things, less measured, a fraction warmer, and he caught himself right after, something recalibrating in his expression. "I'm sorry that happened." "It happens," I said, because that was also my default response. A fact, not a complaint. That doesn't mean it should. I looked at him directly. He looked back. He was not doing anything. Not putting a hand on my arm. Not placing himself between me and the bar as a territorial gesture. Not making the moment about his alpha reaction to what had happened. He was just standing there, steady and present, saying that it should not have happened and meaning it with the weight of someone who understood why that mattered. I felt something shift in my chest, small and significant, like the first warning tremor before an earthquake. "Thank you," I said, which was not my default response to this category of situation because I did not normally have the option of sincerely saying it. He nodded, and we walked back to the table, and neither of us mentioned it again. It started the following week, though I did not recognize it as a pattern immediately. Patterns require data points, and data points require time, and also require you to be paying attention in a way that I was actively trying not to. Monday, I went to the small independent bookshop 3 blocks from the office at lunch because I went every Monday, and Jose was there. He was in the new fiction section, standing with a paperback open in one hand, reading the opening page with the same thorough attention he brought to manuscripts. He looked up when he heard me come in, because the bell above the door was loud, and he looked surprised. Genuinely surprised. Not the manufactured surprise of someone who had engineered an encounter, but the caught-off-guard expression of someone who had not expected to see me there. "Do you come here on Mondays?" he asked. "Every Monday," I said. "For about a year. I used to go to Alderbooks, near my old office," he said. "This is better." He went back to reading his opening page. I went to the literary fiction section. We browsed in different aisles for 20 minutes and left at different times with different books, and I told myself it was coincidence and believed it completely. Wednesday, the coffee place I had been going to for morning coffee for 18 months. A small place on a side street that was slightly out of the way but had the best oat flat white in the neighborhood. Jose was already there when I arrived, at the counter, ordering something. He saw me in the window before I came in, and the expression on his face when I pushed through the door was one I couldn't parse, something caught, something that resolved itself quickly into neutral. "Do you come here?" I asked. "Started this week," he said. "Someone told me it was the best coffee in the area." "Who told you that?" He handed me my usual order, which he had somehow known to order, and I stared at the cup. "Priya told me," he said, "that the person I should ask about the best coffee was you, and that I should order the oat flat white. I ordered it yesterday." She was right. I looked up at him. "You could have just asked me," I said. "You were in a meeting when I went to ask," he said with complete equanimity. I took my coffee and left and drank it on the walk to the office, and did not allow myself to feel anything particular about the fact that it was exactly the temperature I liked it. Friday, the running path by the river. I went on Friday mornings before work, because it was quieter than the weekend, and the river looked different in the early morning, grayer and more honest somehow. And because running was the most efficient method I had found for quieting my own head. I was not prepared to round a curve in the path and find Jose Knight running in the same direction approximately 50 meters ahead of me. He was wearing dark clothes, running with the same unhurried efficiency that he brought to everything else, and when I slowed my pace fractionally, he maintained his, which meant I stayed at 50 meters behind him for the remaining 1.5 kilometers until the path ended and he stopped and turned around. He saw me and went very still. Jay, Jose. A beat of quiet river wind between us. "I run here on Friday mornings," I said. "I didn't know that," he said, and the thing about it was that I believed him. His expression was not guilt or manufacture, it was something more complicated, something that looked, if I was reading it correctly, like a man realizing something about himself. "I'm not following you," he said carefully. "I know," I said, because I did know. That was the part that was confusing me. I told Priya about it over lunch on the following Monday, which meant I told her 2 of the 3 incidents and framed it neutrally. She listened with the particular expression she wore when she was doing something more than listening, assembling, categorizing, reaching a conclusion before the evidence was complete. "And you think it's a coincidence?" she said. "I think it's a small city neighborhood and we apparently frequent some of the same places," I said. "That's statistically possible. 3 times in 1 week, Jay." "It's a small neighborhood." She put down her fork and looked at me with gentle precision. "Can I say something? You're going to regardless. He talks about you," she said. "Not a lot. He doesn't make a thing of it. But he notices things. He'll ask how your manuscript is going. He'll mention something you said in a meeting in a way that shows he was actually paying attention. He'll mention you in passing, and it has a quality to it, like your name means something slightly more than just a colleague's name." I looked at my salad. "And you," she said, "have been arriving to work early since he started, which you were doing before, but now you also make coffee for 2 without being asked, and you did it twice before catching yourself." I had not realized I had done that twice. I felt a specific kind of heat in my face that I strongly preferred not to acknowledge. "Priya," I said. "I'm just reporting data," she said, in the innocent tone of someone reporting far more than data. "I have rules," I said. "I know," she said gently. "How are those working for you?" The answer, if I was honest with myself in the rare moments when I allowed that, was not well, not poorly exactly. Nothing was happening in terms of events, but the rules were working in the way a very thin coat works in December. Technically present, not sufficient. The honest answer, if I allowed full honesty, was this. Jose Knight had somehow, without doing anything dramatic or transgressive or even particularly obvious, become the most significant person in my daily landscape. Not because I had invited this, not because I had done anything reckless, but because he was genuinely good at the things that mattered to me, his work, his attention, his particular brand of quiet respect. And because he was apparently interested in the same bookshop and the same coffee and the same stretch of river. And because when he looked at me like I was interesting, not like I was an omega, not like I was a category, but like I was specifically and particularly interesting to him. I did not know what to do with that. I had not had much practice with it. The publishing gala happened in the 5th week, which in retrospect was accelerated timing, but publishing events do not consult individual readiness before occurring. It was an annual industry event held at a venue on the other side of the city. The kind of thing that required formal wear and networking ability and the performance of professional confidence in a large room full of people assessing each other. I went in a dark green jacket over a black shirt, which was the closest I owned to formal and which I had been told, on previous occasions, was a good color on me. I arrived with Marcus, which was my preferred method of arriving at events, because Marcus was socially fluent in a way that made navigating rooms easier. Jose was already there when we arrived. He was talking to an agent near the entrance, dark suit, white shirt open at the collar, and he turned when we came in with the particular quality of someone who had been aware of the door. His eyes found me first, then Marcus, then back to me. Something adjusted in his expression. He was, objectively, a problem. The first hour was navigation, correct conversations with the right people, the careful balance of available and not too available, manuscript mentions and agent small talk, and the occasional genuine conversation that cut through the professional performance. I was good at this. I had learned to be good at this. Marcus drifted into his own orbit, and I held mine, and it was all very manageable. Then Andrew Penn found me. Andrew Penn was an alpha author, successful, good-looking in an aggressively tailored way, with a recent bestseller and the confidence of a man who had recently had a bestseller. I had worked with his previous editor, and I knew vaguely who he was, and he attached himself to my conversational orbit with the smooth ease of someone who did this often and had rarely been redirected. He was not unpleasant. He was very charming, actually. But there was a quality to the charm that I recognized, the particular shine of attention that is less about the person being attended to and more about the attending. He complemented my editorial instincts. He complimented my jacket. He stood perhaps 3 inches closer than comfortable and didn't move back when I angled slightly away. "I've been hoping someone would introduce us," he said. "You're Jay Daly, aren't you? I've heard excellent things about your work." "That's kind," I said, which was a phrase that committed to nothing. "I mean it specifically. Your notes on the Harmon manuscript, they circulated. Good instincts are rare. Thank you." I was watching the room. Not for escape exactly, just for options. "I'd love to get coffee sometime," Andrew Penn said. Professional context, obviously. He smiled in a way that made it clear the word obviously was performing significant load-bearing work. Or not professional. Either works for me. And there, from approximately 8 feet away and clearly having just ended another conversation, was Jose Knight. He was not looking at Andrew Penn, he was looking at me. And on his face was an expression I had not seen before. Not the measured calm, not the careful neutrality. Something that had gotten through the composure before he caught it. Something that was, if I was reading it correctly, the precise picture of a man who had told himself he was not jealous and who was discovering in real time that he was, in fact, jealous. He caught himself. The expression resettled. He looked away, and I watched him look away, and I watched him take a sip of his drink with the focused attention of someone who is very deliberately not looking at something. I turned back to Andrew Penn. "I appreciate that," I said, "but I generally keep a clear line between professional and personal. Thank you for the kind words about the work." I delivered it pleasantly without door-slamming finality, leaving him somewhere between redirected and declined, and then Marcus appeared from my right with the excellent timing of a good friend and swept me into a conversation about a rights deal, and Andrew Penn drifted elsewhere. I did not look at Jose for the rest of the conversation with Marcus. But when I did finally a few minutes later, he was in a different part of the room, and he was not looking at me. And his jaw was set in the particular way it got when he was controlling something. We ended up near each other at the bar during the break between dinner and the awards portion. He was ordering something with the same quiet efficiency he brought to everything, and I leaned on the bar beside him and said nothing for a moment, just looked at the bottles behind the bartender. "You weren't jealous," I said. A silence. Longer than was comfortable. "No," he said, which was not only the worst possible response but also the most transparent one, delivered in the tone of a man who was very aware that he was not being believed. "Jose, Jay." I turned to look at him. He was still looking at the bottles, his jaw at its controlled angle, and then he turned and looked at me, and the thing about his face in that moment was that it wasn't performing anything, it was just honest. Privately, involuntarily honest in the way faces become when someone has been maintaining something for a while and the maintenance has gotten expensive. "I don't have the right," he said quietly. "I haven't done anything that gives me the right to any particular reaction to who talks to you. I know that." "That's not what I asked." He looked at me for a long moment. Something in his expression moved, not toward composure for once, toward something less managed. "No," he said, "I wasn't jealous." The way he said it this time was different, still the wrong answer technically, but different in quality. The no of a person who is looking at the full complexity of something and choosing inaccuracy over exposure. I picked up the drink the bartender had placed in front of me and said, "Okay," and went back to the dinner tables. My heart was doing something that required, I felt, a private conversation with itself. The manuscript was called Everything You Didn't Say, which was the kind of title that becomes personally relevant at inconvenient moments. It was the debut novel we had been working on together, Jose and I. And it was genuinely good. The story of two people who spent 300 pages failing to say the correct thing to each other until the last 40 pages when they finally ran out of alternative strategies. I was working on the structural notes for the second act, which had a pacing problem in chapters 9 through 14. And I was doing it on a Saturday because the week had been full, and Saturday morning was when my head was clearest. I had not planned to be in the office. I had come in on impulse, with coffee and my laptop, and let myself in with my keycard, and settled at my desk in the pleasant, particular silence of an office building on a weekend morning. I had been there for 2 hours when I heard the elevator. Jose came through the glass doors with coffee in one hand and a stack of manuscripts under his arm, and he saw me and stopped, and we looked at each other across the empty office floor. "I'm not following you," he said. "I didn't know you were here." "I know," I said. "It's Saturday. I know what day it is." He set his things down at his desk. "The Hayward manuscript needs notes by Monday. The McKee manuscript needs structural notes by Monday." A brief pause. "Is it chapter 9 through 14? He said. "Yes." "I have a thought about that if you want it." We moved to the conference room because the conference room had the big table and the whiteboard, and we spread out our notes, and he told me his thought about chapters 9 through 14, which was that the problem wasn't pacing but point of view. The narrative was spending too long in the head of the character who knew less. And a brief shift perspective would let the reader feel the dramatic irony that was currently just a structural stall. He was right. I knew he was right immediately, which was both satisfying and annoying. "That's a significant structural change," I said. "It's a small change with significant effect," he said. "The bones are right. It just needs the right set of eyes." We worked through it together. Him at the whiteboard, me at the table with my notes, going back and forth with the easy shorthand that had developed between us over 5 weeks of working on the same project. At some point he made more coffee on the small break room machine and brought mine without asking how I took it, which he had apparently memorized without announcement. At some point the morning became afternoon, and the light through the conference room window shifted from gray to a washed, pale gold, and we ran out of manuscript to solve. He sat back in his chair and looked at the whiteboard, covered in notes and arrows, and reconsidered scene numbers. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "Yes," I said, because I was apparently not capable of saying no to him in conference rooms. "Why do you work this hard to not need anyone?" The question arrived without preamble and sat in the room and required a response. "I don't do that," I said. "Jay?" His voice was quiet, not pushing, just present. "I'm not criticizing it. I recognize it. I do the same thing. I'm asking because I'm curious about yours." I looked at the whiteboard for a while, at the manuscript notes, at the story of two people who could not say the correct thing until there was no more time for not saying it. "It's easier," I said eventually, "not needing things. It means you don't miss them when they're not there." "What happens when something is there anyway?" he asked. "When you didn't go looking for it and it showed up?" I looked at him then, because the question deserved the direct answer of being looked at. "I don't know yet," I said. "That's a relatively new situation." His eyes were doing the thing they sometimes did, where the gray deepened into something more considered, more present. He held my gaze for a moment and then, carefully, as if placing something very specific and intentional on the table between us, "I wasn't jealous," he said. His voice made the words mean something entirely different from what they said. I held his gaze. "I know," I said, and I let the words mean the same thing in return. The argument happened on a Wednesday in the 7th week, because of course it did. It was a disagreement about the McKee manuscript, which had been a point of low-grade editorial tension for 2 weeks. I believed the ending needed to be rewritten, not from scratch, but significantly enough that we would need to go back to the author with developmental notes that would amount to a structural request. Jose believed the ending was salvageable with line-level adjustments, that the emotional payoff was there, and we were at risk of overcorrecting. We argued about this in Donna's office with Donna present, which was the professional version of the argument. Donna watched us go back and forth with the satisfied expression of a woman who had been in publishing for 30 years and recognized the productive kind of creative conflict. We were both right about different parts of it. That was the problem. "The emotional logic is there," Jose said for the second time. "What's missing is execution, not architecture. You want to tear out a wall that's load-bearing." "The wall is the problem," I said. "The load-bearing structure is fine. It's what's inside the wall that doesn't work." Those are two completely different renovation metaphors. They describe two different problems. Donna made a note. We went back to our desks, and I was irritated in the particular way that comes from being half wrong and not quite wanting to admit it. and I could tell from the set of Jose's shoulders across the office floor that he was in a similar state. The afternoon passed with the faintly charged quality of a room after a storm. At 4:30, a note appeared on my desk. An actual paper note, which was so unexpected that I looked around the office for a moment as if someone might be watching. It said in Jose's handwriting, which was very precise and somehow still managed to look like him, "You're right about the chapter 19 scene. I was wrong. The rest I stand by. J." I read it twice. I picked up a pen and wrote on the back, "The ending needs the revision. But the emotional structure is yours and it's correct. The wall was fine. I was wrong about the wall." I walked to his desk and put it face down near his keyboard and went back to my own desk. He read it without turning around. I could see his shoulders settle, something releasing. At 5 o'clock, without discussion, we were both still at our desks. At 5:15, without looking up from my screen, I said, "There's a place 2 streets over that does excellent takeout ramen. I was going to get it." "A beat. I'll come," he said. It was not a date. We talked about the manuscript for half of it and about other things for the other half, about the books we had loved before we worked in books, about the particular way that working with stories changes how you read them, about whether it is possible to be a person who genuinely loves literature and also someone who negotiates contracts and argues about delivery deadlines. He thought it was possible. I thought it required compartments. He said compartments were fine, that compartments were just another word for managing complexity, and the look he gave me when he said it was pointed in a way that was not about manuscripts. We walked back to the office for our coats in the dark, and on the pavement outside the building, he stopped and said, "Jay." "Yes," I said. "I would like to take you somewhere," he said. "Not coffee, which has become complicated. Not the bookshop, for similar reasons. Somewhere I chose specifically, for the purpose of having dinner with you, if that's something you're willing to consider." The city moved around us. A bus went past. Somewhere nearby, a dog barked once and went quiet. "That's a very careful way of asking someone to dinner," I said. "I'm trying not to do anything you haven't agreed to," he said. "I'm aware I've been showing up in your spaces. I want to be clear, this one is an invitation, not an accidental occurrence." I looked at him in the yellow of the streetlight. His face was entirely open, no composure, no management, just Jose asking and waiting. "Yes," I said, "that's something I'm willing to consider." The thing that happened to his face at that single word was the most privately significant thing I had ever witnessed. He didn't turn it into a performance. He just was, for a moment, uncensored, and it was uncomplicated and honest and made something rearrange itself permanently in my chest. "Saturday," he said, 7 o'clock, I'll send you the details." "Okay," I said. We went our separate ways into the city, and I walked home with my hands in my pockets and my face turned up slightly into the cool air, and I let myself feel, for approximately the length of 3 city blocks, exactly as pleased as I actually was. He chose a restaurant I didn't know on a street I didn't often go down, which turned out to be very good and not too loud, with the kind of lighting that was warm enough to be pleasant and not so dim as to be performative about it. Small, not crowded, tables with actual space between them. "How did you find this?" I asked, settling into my chair. "I asked Marcus," he said. "I told him I needed somewhere good. He gave me 3 options and I chose this one." "On what criteria?" "It doesn't have a gimmick," he said. "Some places have a whole aesthetic and then the food is secondary. I wanted somewhere where the food was the point." I looked at the menu. The food was clearly the point. We ordered. We talked. Not about work. We had agreed on the walkover without specifically agreeing that the evening was not about work, but about everything adjacent to it, which was, I was discovering, almost all of what mattered to Jose Knight. The books he had loved at 15, which were embarrassing in some cases and brilliant in others. The city he had lived in before this one, and what was different about here? The way he ran in the mornings, not for fitness, but because it was the one time of day when the inside of his head was organized. "What does it feel like when it's not organized?" I asked. He considered this seriously, the way he considered most things. "Crowded," he said. "I have a tendency to carry a lot of things at once. other people's expectations, my own expectations. What I should be doing versus what I want to be doing. Running clears some of that. The Friday morning route, I said. Yes. His eyes met mine, which I found genuinely by accident. I want to be clear about that. I know, I said. I believed you. But not the bookshop? I believed you about the bookshop too, I said. Priya confirmed your story about the coffee. You checked. I verified. The corner of his mouth moved in the way that it did, the near smile that was somehow more expressive than most full smiles. You're very thorough. I'm an editor, I said. I look for inconsistencies. Did you find any? I held his gaze. No, I said. I didn't find a single one. Something in the air between us adjusted. Not dramatically. No reaching across the table, no charged moment of physical implication. Just a quality of recognition, of two people looking at each other and knowing that the looking meant something definite. I want to tell you something, he said. All right, the night of the gala. He set down his fork. Andrew Penn. You were not jealous, I said with precision. I was, he said, simply and without armor, looking at me with complete directness. I am sorry that I lied about it. It felt like the safer thing to say. I hadn't earned the right to it. You didn't need to have earned anything, I said. I didn't need the confession. I just needed to know it was real. It's real, he said, all of this. The river, the bookshop, the coffee. I genuinely thought Priya's recommendation was practical information and not an intelligence operation, for whatever it's worth. His eyes were steady. But also, all of it is real. I'm not performing any of it. I looked at him for a long moment, at the honesty in his face, the plainness of it, the particular quality of a person who is not trying to be anything except what he is. Jose, I said. Yes. I made rules, I said. They were good rules. I made them for good reasons. I know, he said. Priya mentioned the rules? Priya mentioned that you have them and that they exist for good reasons and that I should be patient. His mouth moved. She also mentioned that I had been extremely obvious and that I should perhaps consider just asking you properly, which is what I'm attempting. This is quite a lot of Priya involvement. She's very efficient, he said. She wanted us to get here faster. I laughed. The real kind, not the professional kind, the kind that doesn't perform anything. And across the table, Jose Knight smiled fully for the first time since I had known him. Not the near smile, not the corner of the mouth acknowledgement. The real thing, which transformed his face in a way that was entirely private in its intensity, like something only revealed in specific conditions. I thought, I want to keep seeing that. The rules, I said, returning to what mattered. They were, no workplace relationships, no alphas who led with designation, no one whose respect I wasn't certain of. He listened to each one. I understand the first, he said. It's not simple and it deserves to be taken seriously. It does, I agreed. But I've also been using it as a category that contains everything I'm afraid of, which is not the same as a principled position. Is that what this is? Something you're afraid of? Yes, I said, and also something I want. Both of those things are true at once. He was quiet for a moment and then, the second rule. I hope I don't do that. You don't, I said. You have never once led with my designation. You argued with me about Chapter 12 before you knew what I was. What did you think of that? I thought it was the best thing that had happened to me in a professional context in about 2 years, I said honestly. His jaw moved, something affecting. The third rule, he said. I'm certain of your respect, I said. That's the one rule you've cleared without effort. Then what happens to the rules? He asked. I looked at the space between us on the table, at the small, defined distance that had been managed and careful and was becoming something other than that. I think, I said slowly, that the rules were made by a version of me who hadn't met you specifically and who was protecting himself from a general category, which was sensible at the time. But I think I've been applying general category protection to a specific situation, and that specific situation is not the general category. That's a very editorial way of describing your feelings, he said gently. I'm aware. I met his eyes. I'm working on it. He extended his hand across the table, not grabbing, not claiming, just open, on the tablecloth, palm up, an offering of the kind that could be taken or left. I looked at it. I put my hand in his. His fingers closed around mine, warm and certain, and he didn't say anything about it, which was the right choice. Some things don't need annotation. Some things are exactly what they are. We finished dinner like that, hands on the table between us, talking about other things. His sister, who was also in publishing, and with whom he had a constructive rivalry, my habit of reading 2 books simultaneously, one for pleasure and one for structure. The way the city looked different in different weathers, and how both of us had noticed this about the same stretch of river on the same Friday mornings. When we left, he held the door, and outside on the pavement, the city was evening dark and smelled of autumn beginning. And he walked beside me in the direction of my apartment, because it turned out we lived in the same general direction, which was either another coincidence or something the universe was doing deliberately at this point. At the corner where our paths diverged, he stopped. "Jay," he said. "Jose, can I see you again? Not as a colleague, not as a neighbor of the same bookshop and river, as whatever this was." "Yes," I said, "you can see me again." He smiled, and I made a note of it in the part of my memory that had already been accumulating such notes, and I walked home through the autumn-beginning city and felt very clearly and without apology that something had started. What changed first was the simplest thing. I stopped pretending I didn't notice when he arrived in the morning. I had been arriving first and then performing a very focused engagement with my computer screen at the sound of the elevator, and I stopped doing that. I let myself look up. He always looked back. Nothing required to be performed between us. What changed second was the Saturday morning calls. The first one was accidental. He called on the weekend about something manuscript-related that was genuinely time-sensitive, and then the manuscript matter was resolved in 7 minutes, and the call went on for 53 more. Ranging from the book he was currently reading to what I thought about the difference between confidence and certainty to a memory he had of his father's bookshelves and the particular satisfaction of books he returned to. After that, the Saturday morning call became a thing, just the 2 of us talking from wherever each of us was while the weekend happened around us. And it was the easiest, most natural portion of my week. What changed third was the silence. I had always valued silence, which is one of the things that people interpret as coldness or distance, but which is simply a preference for presence over noise. I had not previously met someone who understood this in the same instinctive way, who could be in a room with me on the same sofa or at the same table, and not feel that the absence of conversation required filling. Jose understood it. He would read and I would read, and the silence between us was not empty, but populated with 2 people existing comfortably in the same space. We were careful about the workplace part of it, not secretive. Donna knew within 2 weeks because Donna knew everything, and she said only, "Don't let it compromise your work," which it won't because you're both too professional, so I don't know why I'm saying it. And that was the extent of the conversation. Priya knew from before it happened, effectively, and received the news with the warm satisfaction of someone who had considered herself involved in the outcome. Marcus raised an eyebrow and then made no further comment, which was a form of approval. The workplace remained the workplace. We disagreed about manuscripts with the same productive friction as before, which was healthy and correct. We did not have the kind of relationship that required agreement or the softening of professional opinion to accommodate personal feeling. If anything, the editorial arguments became slightly more alive, because the stakes of being heard felt different when the person hearing you was also the person who called you on Saturday mornings. We had been doing this for 3 weeks when the moment came, and it came on a Thursday evening on his sofa in his apartment, which smelled of cedar and books and the particular ambient presence of a person, and I was reading something and he was reading something, and his apartment was quietly becoming a place I knew the layout of. He set his book down and looked at me, and I could feel the looking before I saw it. You're thinking something, I said without looking up. Usually, he said, something specific. Yes. A pause. A pause. I want to say something. I'm trying to determine if it's too soon. I put my book down. Just say it. He looked at me with the full, composed, privately honest expression that I had come to understand was Jose Knight without armor, which was the version I trusted entirely. I love you, he said. I'm aware it's 3 weeks since the restaurant. I'm aware that's a very short timeline, but I've been aware of it for longer than 3 weeks, and I'd rather say it when it's true than when it's comfortable. The room was very quiet around us. Jose, I said. You don't have to say anything yet, he said immediately. I'm not. Jose, I said again. He stopped. I love you too, I said. I've been trying to figure out when the correct moment was to say it, which is exactly the kind of thing you just said you were trying to avoid, so? His exhale was almost soundless, but I heard it. The release of something held. He reached over and took my hand in the way he had on the first night, certain and unhurried, and we sat like that in the quiet of his apartment for a while, not filling the silence. Because the silence was enough. I thought about the rules I had made, which were still technically rules and still existed for good reasons. I thought about the version of me who had written them, and what he had needed, and what he could not have anticipated. I thought about the morning I had stood at the coffee machine watching rain while someone I hadn't met yet came through a break room door and changed the arrangement of things. I thought about all the Fridays on the river path and the Monday bookshop and the early mornings at the same coffee counter, and how all of those collisions had been the universe arranging something, or had been coincidence, or had been a man who found himself drawn to the same spaces as me because something in him was oriented toward the same things, and how in the end the origin didn't matter as much as what it had become. Can I ask you something? I said. Yes, he said. The first time you came into the bookshop, were you actually surprised to see me? He was quiet for a moment, and I felt the quality of the quiet. Yes, he said. I genuinely didn't know you went on Mondays. But, he said carefully, I had been thinking about you before I went in, not as a plan, just, I'd been thinking about you, and then you were there, and it felt like, he paused. It felt like the world confirming something. I turned this over. The river, I said, I found that run myself. That is completely true. But you kept going on Fridays. Yes. After the first time you saw me there. Yes, he said, without pretending this meant nothing. And the coffee. Priya told me about the coffee in complete innocence, he said. I believe that. But I also believe that when she gave me that information, I received it with a particular kind of attention. I looked at him. He looked back. So, I said, you weren't following me. I wasn't following you, he said. I was just not staying away. Something in the honesty of this, the careful, precise, slightly ridiculous honesty of it, filled the room. I started laughing. Again, the real kind. And after a moment, he was laughing too. And it was the particular laughter of two people who had arrived somewhere through a complicated route and were only now fully appreciating the route. Not staying away, I said, when the laughter had settled. It's the accurate description, he said. It is, I agreed. He brought my hand up and pressed his mouth to my knuckles briefly, lightly, just a touch, and I let him, and we went back to our books. And the apartment was warm and quiet and full of the right kind of presence. And outside the city did its particular city things, indifferent and ambient. While inside, two people who had found each other in the small repeated orbits of daily life sat in the uncomplicated fact of having been found. There is a particular quality to the way things settle when they are real. It doesn't announce itself. There's no dramatic turning point, no single moment where you look up and think, now, this is it. This is the thing that has changed. It accumulates quietly, the way good things do, in the repetition of small choices made in the same direction. The McKee manuscript went to the author with our combined notes, and she wrote back within a week to say they were the most useful developmental notes she had ever received, that they made the book feel fully like itself for the first time. Jose forwarded the email without comment. And I walked to his desk and put a hand briefly on his shoulder and walked back. And neither of us made anything of it except that it was nice and it was ours. Donna scheduled a team meeting and announced that Everything You Didn't Say had been shortlisted for a debut fiction prize, which was not something that happened often and was worth celebrating with the good champagne from the supply room that everyone pretended not to know was in the supply room. We had worked on that manuscript together from the beginning, and when Donna said the shortlist announcement, Jose looked across the room at me, not at Donna, not at the rest of the room, just at me. And I held the look for exactly the amount of time that told him I registered it, and we both went back to Donna. Saturday mornings became something I measured the rest of the week against, and not just the calls. There were Saturdays when I went to his apartment in the morning and made coffee while he finished his run. And Saturdays when he came to mine and read on my sofa while I finished manuscript notes, and it was astonishing how few adjustments were required. How little of myself I had to rearrange to make space for him. He took up room, but only the room that had been empty before, which was the specific kind of room taking up that felt like restoration rather than displacement. I called my sister on a Sunday in October and told her. She was 3 years older than me and very perceptive and had been gently asking every few months for the past 2 years whether I was seeing anyone, and I had been equally gently deflecting. When I told her about Jose, she said nothing for a moment, and then, "How did you meet?" "He came in through the break room door on a rainy morning," I said, "and smelled like cedar." "Jay," she said with deep feeling. "I know," I said. "Are you happy?" I thought about the question with the seriousness it deserved. I was sitting at my window with coffee, looking at the October city, and across the city Jose was doing something in his apartment, and in a few hours I would go there, or he would come here. And we would be in the same room, and it would be ordinary and good. "Yes," I said, in a very specific, very quiet way that I think is the way I actually do happy. "That's the best kind," my sister said. I thought she was probably right. The thing about having been careful for a long time, about having built walls and procedures and systems of protection, is that when you finally stop, when you let the walls be something more navigable, you discover the landscape that was always behind them. Not foreign territory, not somewhere new, your own interior, seen without the distance that caution places between yourself and everything you feel. I had been careful for years, with good reason. The reasons had not disappeared. They had simply been met, one, by the specific reality of one specific person, and found insufficient to outweigh what was on the other side of them. Jose Knight was not perfect. He was occasionally too controlled in the early part of an argument, holding a position past the point of usefulness because he had not yet fully processed his way through to where he wanted to land. He had a habit, in the morning, of taking up more coffee than he intended to leave, which was a minor thing and which he always apologized for with genuine chagrin. He carried things quietly and privately when he might have benefited from saying them sooner, and I recognized this tendency because it was my own tendency. And we were working on it in the particular way that two people work on a shared limitation, which is imperfectly, but honestly. And he was warm in a way that was entirely not performed, in the way he talked to junior colleagues with the same attention he gave to senior ones, in the way he remembered small things about people and referenced them weeks later, in the way he looked at me, always like I was interesting and worth understanding, like the project of knowing me was one he found genuinely engaging and not close to complete. Which was the thing? Being interesting to someone. Being specifically, particularly interesting, and not because of what I was. Not because of designation or convenience or proximity, but because of who I was. The specific shape of how I thought and what I cared about, and how I went about the daily business of being in the world. I had not known how much I wanted that until someone gave it to me, and then I recognized it as a thing I had been wanting for a very long time. The first Friday of November was cold and clear, the kind of cold that arrives at you in vertical layers, bright and clean and unambiguous. The river was silver. The path was quiet at this hour, most people having made a reasonable calculation about temperature and remained inside. I was not most people. I had been running for 20 minutes when I heard footsteps behind me, and I did not slow and I did not turn because I already knew the particular pace of them, the unhurried efficiency, the specific weight of someone who runs like he does everything else, the cadence of him, the way he moved through space without announcing it. He came up alongside me without speaking, and we ran together in the same comfortable silence that inhabited all our silences, and the river moved beside us, pale and quiet, and the city was somewhere behind us being a city, and for a while there was nothing but the morning and the cold and the sound of two people moving through it at the same pace. The trees along the path had given up most of their leaves by now, standing in the November air with their branches bare and honest, not attempting anything. I had always liked trees in November for that reason. Something clarifying about the absence of ornament, everything down to the essential shape. Eventually, one of us always breaks the silence, for the good reason of having something worth breaking it for, he said. I'm not following you. I know, I said. I'm exactly where I want to be, he said. I looked over at him, at the side of his face in the November light. The dark hair and the gray eyes and the jaw and the particular quality of presence that had been rearranging my interior landscape since the morning. He came through a breakroom door and smelled like cedar and winter, and changed the arrangement of things without knowing he was doing it. There had been a version of me, careful, systematic, defended. Who would have managed this away? Who would have applied the rules with clean precision and remained safely on the correct side of all of them and had the particular loneliness of someone who has made excellent decisions? That version of me had been reasonable. I was not sorry he had existed. He had kept me intact until this was possible. But this was possible now. This was the morning on the river path, and the silver of the water and the cold that was honest and clear, and Jose Knight running beside me with his unhurried certainty, and the weeks behind us of all the small accumulated things, and the future ahead doing whatever futures do, unpredictable and open. So am I said. We ran on. The river went silver and quiet beside us. The morning opened ahead. And that, I thought, that right there, the two of us in the cold, in the exact places we had chosen to be, was the thing that all the rules had been protecting me for, not keeping me from. For the preparation had been for this, a morning on a river path with someone who showed up in all the right places and looked at me like I was interesting specifically and particularly. Like I was worth knowing all the way through. At the end of the path, where it curved back up toward the street and the city resumed its ordinary business around us, we stopped, breathing, the river behind us, the November morning doing its cold, clear thing. Jose turned to me, and his face had the color of exertion in it, which made him look younger and less composed and entirely himself. And he looked at me with the expression that I had been accumulating and storing in the most careful part of my memory since the gala, since the conference room, since the restaurant, since all the mornings on this same path, the expression that was just, you, specifically you, and I am glad you exist. I took a step toward him, and he closed the remaining distance, and there on the river path, in the November morning, he put his arms around me, and I let myself be held, which was a thing I had not done easily or often. And it was warm against the cold, and it was solid, and it was his, and it was mine, and it was the simplest thing in the world. J. Daily 24, Omega, Associate Editor, professional at managing situations, completely, thoroughly, irreversibly in love with a man who had said he wasn't jealous and then shown up everywhere the Omega went, and who was here now specifically and on purpose in the right place for the right reason. At the beginning of a November morning on a silver river path with no accident about it at all. Very much okay with that. Better than okay. This. If you made it to the end, you're my kind of person. Leave a subscribe. Comment down your favorite part of the story, and if you want early access to videos, exclusive content, or just want to support the channel, make sure to join our Patreon. Link is in the description. Even one member genuinely means the world to me. See you in the next one.